Success comes from the convergence of four separate phenomena, according to Graham Weaver's newest playbook for entrepreneurship and life. Hey everyone, I wanted to get this episode out today because I just saw a really good episode of My First Million with Graham Weaver last night. He's like this very successful private equity guy. The link is down below in the description. And I also want to tie that back to another episode I watched from My First Million with James Currier. But first I want to talk a little bit about this book that Graham Weaver wrote called How to Live an Asymmetric Life. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that asymmetry is one of my favorite words. It's one of my favorite concepts. So I want to talk about this book a little bit today, as well as some other things. And full disclaimer, I have not actually read this book yet. So far, I've just looked at the AI summaries. But I'll have some updates here once I've gotten a chance to read the full text. So when we're talking about asymmetry, what we really mean is we're talking about, constructing scenarios where there's a lot more upside than there is downside. This is really relevant in something like the stock market because you're not exactly sure what's going to happen, but you want to make sure that whatever it is going to be skewed heavily in your favor. So in order for an asymmetric construction to be relevant, there has to be some degree of randomness or some degree of imperfect information. And that's really at the core of what makes something a strategic solution. If all the information is known, if we have everything ahead of time, then it's just a matter of solving the problem. And that might be computationally challenging, it could be technologically challenging, but once we have unknowns, we're entering a different realm. And so this book, How to Live an Asymmetric Life, is essentially a strategy guide. It's for life and entrepreneurship. So from what I'm reading, the kind of core foundation of this book is initially built on doing stuff in your daily life that has potentially outsized returns. So that could be spending a little bit of your time, maybe spending a little bit of your money, doing kind of hobbies or side projects or experiments, getting involved in things that are basically going to potentially open doors for you, even if you're not exactly sure where it'll go, or maybe it seems like it might not work out because maybe there's a chance that something really cool happens. So this could be things like writing, programming, public speaking, going to network events, things like this. Although we might not necessarily plan for any of these things to evolve into success, they create optionality. And you know I love optionality too. More videos on that to come. And in order to get here, you need to accept that when you're first trying something new, it might not work out. And when you very first start something, you might be terrible at it. And so you're likely to see what they're calling in this book worse first. So basically just accept that things are going to suck for a little bit, but with some time and some patience, you'll be able to make some progress. And he reinforces in the episode that it's not just a little time or a little patience. Some things take a long time. But he says if you're willing to put in a decade of work to something, he's like, you can basically solve almost anything. You're going to spend that time on something anyway. But if you focus that time on doing something that you love, you can achieve mastery and optionality. And this acceptance is what enables you to get your foot in the door in the first place. A lot of people aren't willing to commit to something long term or are afraid to do something that seems challenging. Now, it's a pretty big ask to spend a decade working on one project. It's a long time horizon to be working with. And so he says one of the kind of key enabling factors here is you need to be doing something that you love. So one of the very first things you got to do is figure out what you love, because that's going to enable you to commit all that time towards that specific project. It's easy to invest your time into something that you love, and those investments that you make all compound over time. And so in his episode, he emphasizes that everyone should figure out what it is that lights them up. And if you aren't sure what that thing is, then start with a list. Start with 3 or 5 or 10 things. Personally, I feel like this really clicked for me, so I immediately grabbed my journal and I started my own list. You also need to figure out what your goals are. I thought this was really interesting. He said that a lot of people don't even do this or know what their goals are. And so he said you should write them down. And in fact, write them down every day is what he advocates for. While doing what you love is great, it might not help you achieve all the goals that you have in life. For me personally, I love going to the gym, but it might not help me much with my career or social goals. I also love Dave's Hot Chicken, but I think when I eat it, it hurts all of my goals. My takeaway from Graham is that when you can align what you love doing with your goals, you put yourself on a low resistance path towards success. I really like this frame as well, so I immediately grabbed my journal and I also wrote down all of my goals. We'll go over some of those in Friday's episode. I want to have a rundown of like channel updates and some goals and things like that. So there are 4 kind of key points that come up in the summary here. So one is do hard things. Basically it says comfort is the enemy of growth. When you're willing to learn a new skill, you're going to suck at first and it can be really uncomfortable. But the downside is really just the time that you're spending and a little bit of temporary discomfort. But the upside is that you can come out of it with brand new skill set, brand new lessons learned, depending on what it is, new relationships, etc. And then the second one is to do something that you love. And this is asymmetric because when you do something that you love, it's really easy to reinvest your time. You'll work really hard at something that you love, and so the upside is much greater than if you were doing something that you weren't really that interested in. When you're doing something that you're not really interested in, your results are much more likely to be mediocre, you're more likely to have burnout, stuff like that. The third one is prepare to do it for a long time. It says be willing to do it for a decade. And then the fourth is write your story. And by this, I think Graham is basically talking about setting your own goals and being deliberate about how you spend your time and what you choose to pursue, rather than just letting things happen to you and accepting the circumstance. And in addition to writing down your goals and what you love, Graham also advocates for writing down your fears. He says when you have a fear in your subconscious, it's going to affect your actions, but once you write it down, then it becomes a problem that you can start solving actively. This reminds me a little bit of what I used to hear at my first job, which is that what can be measured can be managed. Getting something onto the page is the first step. And I want to tie this back with another episode that I saw in My First Million with James Currier. This is actually one of my favorite episodes, and it's really stuck with me. But James says that the number one trait for entrepreneurs is speed. And he defines it in a pretty interesting way. He said, speed is not just about grinding and working as many hours a day as you can. Speed is how quickly you can adapt towards success. He says that many ideas fail. In fact, most ideas fail. And so you need to be able to quickly adapt and find the ideas that work rather than just committing to your original plan. Still maintain the goal, but be willing to adapt and adapt as quickly as you can. He talks about this company that he started that was going bankrupt, and so he changed the name, even though a lot of the employees didn't necessarily want the name changed. He said that he had founded the company with the intent to deliver a serious product, but after some market testing, they found that the market didn't want the serious product. They actually wanted a silly product instead. And so they ended up pivoting, and literally overnight, they saw a huge increase in their traffic. He also talks about another project where he knew that he wanted to build a video game, but he wasn't sure what game he wanted to build, and so he actually ran a bunch of Facebook ads, testing some different things, different kinds of names in order to figure out which ones got the highest click-through rates. And once he figured out what the market was interested in, then he went and built the actual product. And so with James, I see this common theme of committing to the goal, but not necessarily committing to the path in order to get there. The path remains flexible depending on whatever's going to be the easiest. That is the path with the highest asymmetry between returns and effort. And so putting these two episodes together, I end up with this mental model where you're looking at a Venn diagram where you're trying to figure out what you love doing on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, it's what's going to work, what's actually going to bring you success. And you're trying to get to that overlap in the middle from the left side where you start as quickly as possible. You don't necessarily know what route is going to get you there the fastest, and so you're trying things, you're iterating as quickly as possible, and given enough time, you'll eventually get there. Although it'd be great to get there sooner rather than later. Interestingly, there's already a famous Venn diagram out there that feels eerily similar, except it's with 4 circles instead of just 2. At the top is what you love, on the right is what the world needs, on the bottom is what you can be paid for, and on the left is what you're good at. And you really want to be in the center of those 4 things. This is called Ikigai. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked today's episode, please react and subscribe, and let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.